Hi folks, Florida Man here, and this is a diplomacy commentary on a War in the Americas variant map game that I played on PlayDiplomacy. For this one, I interviewed one of the other players, whose name is George, or username MasterGR. Please enjoy. Hello George / MasterGR.
Hello, everyone.
It's a pleasure having you on here, since we just finished playing this War in the Americas variant game of diplomacy. I'm sharing my screen with you so that you can answer questions about the game as it went for me, and we'll discuss our respective plans, tactics, the diplomacy with the various people involved, and how the game went.
Sounds good to me.
So, just to get started, please tell the audience which country you played.
I played Great Britain in this game, or GB, otherwise known.
And I played Spain. I assume you've played on the War in the Americas map before.
Yeah, I played 4 or 5, maybe 6 games. Yeah, not too many, but I played a few.
That sounds about like me. Have you played Great Britain before?
No, that was my first time. I was actually very eager to try it.
It is kind of an exciting power to play. I've been Great Britain before myself, but I found it kind of unwieldy. You know, too much going on, too many different regions, and impossible to ever protect the Falklands.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to play Great Britain actually because exactly it's in so many regions, so I thought it would give me, an opportunity to talk with everybody on the board, especially because of the Falklands as well. And it really did do that. I mean, spoiler alert, I will lose the Falklands eventually, but I did manage to keep them actually for a few years. I think I was looking at the PlayDiplomacy, archived games, and I think I have seen one time Great Britain actually at least once keep like the Falklands and even like build a small empire in the deep south. But I think that's probably very challenging to do. Yeah.
Yeah, that must have required a lot of diplomatic finesse and probably a disproportionate amount of effort in the south. All right, why don't we get into what you were thinking at the beginning of this specific game, what your plans were, what your communications were like. What were you doing in 1840 or 1841, I should say?
Yeah, sir. So my initial goal of the game was obviously to keep as many of my colonies as possible. Without actually expecting to keep all of them. My ideal scenario was one where I would eventually unify Canada with the Caribbean. So to be absolutely honest with you, I know you were playing Spain. I did see Spain as a bit of an obstacle towards that goal. So I was, fairly set on taking it out. But, with that said, communication is always a factor. And who's playing what. So I did again want to unify ideally Canada with the Caribbean, but I was also giving a chance to every player in between, and see how it goes. My initial diplomacy was I wanted to make sure that Venezuela was on my side because if Venezuela is not with you, you can just lose Trinidad in the first year, which is a pretty poor outcome. I mean, it robs you of a home center plus it's a loss, it's a center loss, right? But it's also a key center for building in the Caribbean.
Quite a big deal, yes.
Yeah. So Venezuela was one, Spain was the other, and I was talking with you, I think, quite a bit in the early game.
Yes, you were. And to be honest, my early perspective, and I think my general perspective is that as Spain, what I really need is just to have one solid ally, ideally one of you or Mexico as a solid ally. And I did not feel like I was making good progress with either of you. And frankly, long term, as Spain, I would probably want to get rid of Great Britain because we're both the island powers in the Caribbean, and it's, there's an extent to which I can't help but think, maybe it's not big enough for the both of us, unless you're focusing almost entirely on northern South America, and I'm focusing almost entirely on Mexico and the USA.
Yeah.
But I felt it was a little unlikely that was going to happen, and also that the ideal just would be that I would control Jamaica and Trinidad as well as the islands in between us, So I was trying to forge those connections with Mexico and the USA that would allow me to fight you, but also aware that I wasn't getting very much from them. I was trying to work with you because that was an alternate option. But even though we exchanged a lot of messages, I don't think you and I ever really came to a good agreement.
Yeah. So the game was pretty interesting. So if I can give a little bit of background of the early communications, I remember talking with the USA early on, and I actually suggested that we do a bounce in the Erie Canal. It seems to me that that's kind of a no-brainer, to be honest, for Great Britain, because if the US gets into the Erie Canal, Great Britain is in a pretty rough position. And the same is true actually for the US. So it seemed to me that a bounce over there would have been good for both of us.
Very sensible. It's
Yeah.
like the Black Sea.
What's that?
I said it's like the Black Sea on the classic map.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not really. I mean, I have gone through a few games. I don't think I have seen ever anybody do a bounce there. At least it didn't seem to me that it was something that has been agreed upon before. But it seems to me like an excellent way to start the game with the USA. The USA did bounce me there, but I guess once we go to the next, to the fall, we will actually see that the USA also moved to New England, so that didn't really help me a lot.
We're now looking at the spring orders.
Yeah.
So yeah, the USA did bounce you there. And the way I've done this, because the War in the Americas map is very long, is that I've split it up so that you can see half of the map on one slide and the other half of the map will be visible on the next.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, like the US and I bounced there, and then the US also moved to New England while I moved to North Atlantic to hopefully grab Greenland. And obviously that was not something that built any confidence in the USA for me. And even more so, it was also kind of pointless because I maybe if you have moved to both the Erie Canal and New England, so maybe you have some potential to do some damage there to Great Britain. But if you just move a fleet into New England, the only place where this can go is Halifax. And there is no actually coast connecting New England to Montreal, so you cannot even move to Montreal with that fleet. So I mean, best you can do is just prevent Great Britain from getting Greenland at that point. So that was not great. And then meanwhile, looking at the Caribbean, I remember at the time talking a lot with Venezuela, and I was lucky, I think, because I managed to get and develop a very good relationship with Venezuela. And Venezuela at the time told me, and I don't know if that's true or not, but Venezuela told me that he promised you that he would move to East Caribbean because you asked him to move to East Caribbean, obviously to bounce me out of it. Again, I don't know if there is truth in that or not, whether you actually made that suggestion to him.
It is true.
It is true. Yeah. And I was kind of surprised, that in Venezuela told me, okay, I did actually promise Spain I'm going to move to East Caribbean, but I'm going to do it. I'm like, wow, you didn't have to promise it, but sure, I'll take that. So that, obviously built some really good early trust with Venezuela. And at the time I was thinking, okay, if I move to East Caribbean and I don't get bounced by Venezuela, and I think you had actually asked me to open in North Caribbean and you wanted to get 3 centers, right? You wanted to get the Bahamas, Haiti, and Santo Domingo, if I recall. And I was thinking, that's like a lot of centers for Spain to get in year one. And if Spain gets those 3 centers in year one, I'm doomed, basically, in the Caribbean. There's no way I'm going to be able to hold anything there. Plus, I couldn't really get much out of it myself. I mean, I could go to Guyana and try to get maybe Suriname, which is not a center that can be actually contested in year one for Great Britain if it opens in Guyana. And obviously I would also go for Nicaragua, but I was thinking still, once you had like 6 fleets in the Caribbean, you were solid there. There was no way you were getting kicked out, until like the late game maybe. So
sounds like you were making your decisions here based on you didn't want me to get strong.
I mean, I could have maybe negotiated, for you to get 2 centers, but 3 centers, it was a tough sell.
Well,
yeah.
I can understand that. I wasn't necessarily expecting I would actually get all 3 in the first year. I was just hoping that I would get all 3 eventually.
Okay.
If that would have been okay with me, just to get all 3 eventually.
Yeah.
Because I really didn't want for me to be in Santo Domingo and you to be in Haiti or something, to have your center right in the middle of my centers.
Yeah, it's hard to sell the island. I definitely get that. it's hard to share the Haiti/Santo Domingo island. Yeah. Yeah, but my math was, if I bounce Spain in North Caribbean and I get in East Caribbean, then best case scenario, Spain gets one build, right? Because, Spain can get the Bahamas and maybe, or like Haiti and Santo Domingo, or the Bahamas and Santo Domingo. And then, I can either bounce Spain out of one of those, or I can take Puerto Rico, or I can take a shot at Puerto Rico anyways. And, like, I could have gone for Haiti, for example, hoping that you wouldn't go for it. And in that case, actually, you would get two builds, right? Like, but I think, yeah, the way I was thinking about it, if I go for Puerto Rico, you will only get one build at the most. So that that really was my play there. And I think that's what happened in the end in that scene.
Anything interesting to talk about in South America for this season before we move on to fall?
Yeah, South America, really quick. I was talking with Argentina and Chile at the time, right? And basically my goal was to get Patagonia, obviously. Just as a side note, I have thought that it would have been actually a nice opening for Great Britain to open in South Atlantic in the first year, because that connects to Mid-Atlantic, right? And then like next year, like so in fall, you can be Mid-Atlantic, and then the following year you can actually have another unit or Sargasso. But I think if you open that way, you're almost guaranteed to lose the Malvinas in the second year. Plus you lose a shot at Patagonia, right? So if I had known for a fact that somebody else would go for Patagonia, either Argentina or Chile, maybe I would have opened in South Atlantic. But based on
no one else did.
What's that? Yeah, nobody else did. Yeah.
So you made the right choice, I think.
Yeah, at the time, both Argentina and Chile told me that they would not open for Patagonia. I talked Argentina quite a bit into opening towards Brazil, and Brazil actually was kind of oblivious to that. And I thought, Argentina is probably playing me because Brazil is telling me that Argentina has a deal with them. And I really had not received that many messages from Argentina, but in the end, Argentina actually did open against Brazil, and Chile itself did tell me that he wouldn't go for Patagonia, and I told him, hey, let me go for Patagonia, then maybe I can help you with Argentina or something. So actually, and I think Chile actually made a pretty solid opening. It's probably the best opening you can make, especially given that Peru also opened Tarapacá. So that gave Chile the option to support itself into Antofagasta, which it did afterwards.
Oh, I agree. I think Chile made a very strong opening here for what Chile's interests actually are, and the fact that Peru made such a kind of potentially anti-Chilean opening.
Yeah, it really did. Peru also made actually an anti-NG opening. Generally, the opening of Peru in this map, in this year, I found it not very friendly towards any of its immediate neighbors. And NG, meanwhile, had arranged the bounce in Santa Marta with Venezuela, which I knew about, which is, it's fine for Venezuela, but actually I think it's a pretty bad move for New Granada, because then New Granada only has one unit for Ecuador. I cannot recall actually whether New Granada in fact got Ecuador or not here. I think it did.
Well, New Granada did capture Panama, so that's good.
Yeah. But Panama is a given pretty much, I think, for New Granada in the 41. Yeah. The other thing I was going to say, the other person I was talking with a lot actually was Mexico, and I was really pushing Mexico not to let the USA get Texas, because, USA with two builds in the first year, that's 4 units right there, right? That the USA starts with. Yeah, and then like USA also gets Chicago. If it also gets Texas, it's 6 units. And against my, say maybe 3, maybe 4 units in the north, depending on how many builds I get, it's not ideal. But Mexico actually was pretty content to let the USA have Texas.
Well, from his positioning here, he looks pretty well prepared to mess with Texas.
Yeah, it really, he really does, right?
Yes. Was that your persuasion?
Maybe. So okay, in my view, Mexico has only one guaranteed sender in this map in the first year, and that's Texas actually, right? Mexico cannot really guarantee anything else. It can be bounced out of Yucatan. And to be honest, even Texas is not guaranteed if Havana chooses to bounce Gulf of Mexico, which happens sometimes. But, as long as Mexico gets access to Gulf of Mexico, Mexico can guarantee Texas for itself. Anything else is much less of a certainty. So I'm guessing that Mexico to some extent opened like this to have a shot at Texas. But if I recall, actually, Mexico did not end up attacking Texas. It played nice towards the USA. which was pretty frustrating to me, especially given how the US had opened against me, and I had also kind of opened a little bit aggressive towards you in the Caribbean. So I was getting pretty concerned actually about the Spain-US alliance against me at the time.
Well, I was trying to get US against you, especially after the opening.
The fall.
Oh, fall, not year two. Yes, the fall. We see USA is not really attacking you, at least not really, not right now.
Yeah, so the USA, I managed to convince the US that he had nothing to gain by going for Halifax, and I told him I was going to cover it. Unfortunately, I did. I should have gone for Greenland, obviously. But, hindsight is 2020 in diplomacy, right?
You being more cautious here was probably the wiser choice. If US had gotten into Halifax, I think your whole game looks very different.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Like, if the US is in Halifax, then yeah, maybe I build in Montreal. But, I am in Greenland. Greenland is actually not a position that you can easily come back from if you don't have other support, and especially the US is in Halifax, right? So my whole game would just become much, much harder, as you say. But I did convince the US to move away, and Mexico, as we can see here, actually did allow the US to keep Texas and even reinforce it with the US moving to New Orleans. Though maybe that's a good thing for Mexico because it means that the US can now not build a fleet in New Orleans. And meanwhile, I got out of Jamaica, hoping to be able to build there, and I got into Puerto Rico, thinking that most likely you would try to gain a center at the time, which I think actually was a pretty key move for me. And luckily also Venezuela kept playing nice towards me and went for Guyana.
Everything about these moves went as badly as it possibly could for me.
Yeah, a little rough for Spain, but at least you did still gain a build, right? But I mean, losing Puerto Rico, in my view, it's one of those castles in this map. Like I think Puerto Rico, Jamaica, maybe Trinidad, they are like some of those territories, and the Bahamas that are just pretty tough to conquer in the island spaces. So I think once somebody gets Puerto Rico, it's really a center that can carry you to the end of the game.
Yeah, it's quite a difficult thing losing Puerto Rico, especially given that for me it was a home center. At the same time, I did gain the two centers I tried to take. I was really hoping that you were actually not going to attack me, or even bounce me. I was thinking maybe you would try for Haiti or Santo Domingo, and we would just bounce. But it went much worse than that for me.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent it's equivalent, but even had you been able to keep Puerto Rico, then you would have built it, right? So had we bounced in either Haiti or Santo Domingo, it's not a huge deal because then you can take whatever we bounced at, you can take it in the next year, right? And then you also build Puerto Rico, and you're actually pretty golden against me, especially if the US doesn't come your way. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have any other comments actually about this phase here and like the diplomacy that you recall?
At this point, I was trying to get everyone to attack you that I could, and it was a very frustrating season for me because I thought Venezuela was perfectly positioned to attack you, even though Venezuela didn't do what I wanted by bouncing you in the Caribbean. He did move to Cumana. That should have been an easy move from there into Trinidad, but he decided to go for what wasn't even a center, the Guyana Current. He could have taken Georgetown. It didn't make any sense what he did.
Yeah. I do remember actually Venezuela's reasoning. If you want, I can go through what Venezuela told me at the time.
Oh, yeah. Please.
So Venezuela at the time, Venezuela, we didn't talk about Brazil, right? But Brazil opened in Mato Grosso, which I think, is a very standard opening for Brazil. And then it opened the South Salvador fleet, it opened it to Para in the first spring, right? So then what happened was now Brazil had two on Manaus. I think that's a very valid opening actually for Brazil because Venezuela cannot really guarantee Manaus, right? Venezuela can open Manaus, but cannot keep it if Brazil actually goes for it in the fall. Yeah, perhaps one mistake that Brazil made here was that it supported the fleet into Manaus instead of the army, right? So at the time there were no actual other units bordering Mato Grosso, so Brazil could have supported Mato Grosso into Manaus, and it's much better to have an army in Manaus, obviously, because the army can go anywhere else. The fleet can only go to Amazonia or Para once it gets into Manaus. Para is, an important position for Brazil. Amazonia is pretty useless at this point, especially since it does not really connect to any other centers. So I think at the time, in any case, Venezuela was worried about Brazil, and he told me, well, I can open in Georgetown, but I think I'm going to instead open in Guyana Current, so that when Brazil dislodges me from Manaus, I can actually retreat to Georgetown, and I can at least, get Suriname the following year. Plus, I'm going to have a unit in Guyana, which is going to prevent Brazil from getting in there. I think it was pretty valid reasoning from Venezuela's side at the time, to be honest.
Well, that would make more sense. Some very pessimistic reasoning, I guess, assuming he couldn't talk his way into keeping Manaus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think there was some good reasoning there. Yeah. Do you have any other recollections from this phase?
I was trying to get, Mexico and the USA to attack you as well. I was just trying to get whatever help I could anywhere. I think I tried New Granada as well.
Yeah.
New Granada was basically not picking up the phone. Mexico was starting to seem like he might be on your side. USA, who I thought was actually taking me up and attacking you, just does exactly the opposite of what I wanted.
Yeah. That was successful in convincing the US to move away there, luckily.
You did very well diplomatically here.
Yeah, and Mexico, Mexico doesn't really have a lot of potential to attack Great Britain early on, but if Mexico plays really nice with the USA, that's obviously bad for Great Britain, and Mexico was playing really nice with the USA, so, instead of going for Texas, it opened for Yucatan, and then Chiapas, which allows him to go to Guatemala afterwards. So, it's a pretty solid opening for Mexico, plus Apacheria, which allows him to go for Alta California after, but it was not the opening I wanted to see, to be honest. New Granada, as you said, was not picking the phone. I think at the time I remember hearing from New Granada that it was busy with real life, and I think New Granada actually answered the first message like 3 days after the beginning of the game. So, and everybody was wondering what's going on with New Granada. But once New Granada started talking, they were pretty reasonable, right? But yeah, generally their communication was not very consistent, and I think they were afraid they were gonna get Ecuador there, so they kept Panama, but then opened into Gulf of Chiriquí over there, which was, it meant they were only getting one bill. But still, I think New Granada in the end did all right actually early on, and Peru actually didn't end up getting Ecuador there.
Yeah, that's interesting that they didn't communicate, because New Granada could have had Ecuador, and maybe Peru would have gotten Galapagos instead. Yeah,
I don't know what's going on there exactly, but my guess is that New Granada didn't trust Peru at the time, and thought that maybe Peru would go for Ecuador. Even I think Peru had told New Granada that it wouldn't. Yeah, but anyway, this part of the action didn't affect us much. And other than that, I managed to get Patagonia over there at the bottom, which was definitely pretty helpful.
Yes, that's again everything you're doing with your diplomacy seems to be going as well as it possibly can here.
Yeah, it was overall a pretty good year. Other than Mexico, again, that was the only thing. I was hoping Mexico would go for the US, but it didn't.
That's true. He did not exactly go for the throat against the US.
Yeah, he let the US keep Texas, basically.
But, Mexico would have been starting a fight for literally no benefit to him, because he would not have gained any additional centers numerically. He would have been getting Texas instead of Yucatan, but that would have been starting a fight and not getting any additional builds.
Yeah. No, I think it was very sensible what Mexico did. It just was not what I wanted him to do, but from Mexico's perspective, it was very sensible, I agree.
Going to the retreats phase, just as you were mentioning, Venezuela goes to Georgetown.
Yeah. And so gets its first center, yeah.
Your first center through a retreat.
It was a bit of a risk actually that Venezuela took there, but it worked out for them, yeah.
Yes. So now we're in the builds phase, and you chose to build in Montreal, Halifax, as well as Jamaica and Trinidad.
So actually, I think I didn't build in Halifax because I had just covered it from North Atlantic, right? I did build in Montreal, and I built in Jamaica and Trinidad, and I think that's...
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so that's 3 builds, and I think I got Toronto, I got Jamaica, I got Toronto, I got Puerto Rico, and I got Patagonia. So yeah, these were my 3 builds right there. And you built in Santiago de Cuba. I was a little curious actually why you built in Santiago and not in Havana at the time, because that, once Mexico builds in Veracruz, as it did, and opens in Gulf of Mexico, then it has direct access to Havana. So I did expect you to build in Havana, and I was a little surprised. Do you have any comments on that?
Oh, absolutely. I was really hoping and kind of expecting that Mexico would remain neutral at worst in our conflict and not attack me alongside you. And I was also thinking that while I would need Haiti and Santo Domingo to secure East Caribbean from you, that I could move Santiago de Cuba up to Canal Viejo de Bahama and take the Bahamas while I was fighting you. And that would give me the edge that I needed in order to have more fleets than you in the water. And that was really the only way I could see myself actually winning the fight is if I got an extra build from there, because there was nowhere else I could get a build from, and as things stood, we were equally matched in numbers.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so your goal at the time was to open in Canal Viejo and get the Bahamas.
Then Mexico builds in Veracruz.
Was that not part of the deal with Mexico? Did you have a deal with him?
No, not really. I really wanted Mexico to attack you, as I said, but Mexico seemed already to be more interested in working with you and siding with you, so I wasn't able to reach much of a deal with him.
It was interesting. Again, with Mexico, I was talking a lot, and I was really putting a lot of pressure on him to move on the US. And I think what did it was in 42, Venezuela actually, he sent, I think, a pretty long message to Mexico, which he sent to me as well, where he really encouraged Mexico to move on the United States, because the USA was getting 6 builds, right? Was getting 2 builds, would have like 6 units, which we see here. He actually built in Washington, D.C. West Coast. That was another foul by the USA, by the way. The USA, after moving away from New England to Gulfstream, I thought, okay, we can make this work. But maybe I made the mistake of telling him I was going to build a fleet in Montreal. I think he didn't like that, even though I was not actually planning on sending that fleet against the US, if the US would let me be. But the US really didn't like that. So the US ended up building in Washington, D.C. West Coast, which borders the Eastern Great Lake. And, if the US got in there, I was there, basically. That's the reason why I built in Montreal, because the US did build there. It's kind of, again, like the Black Sea, maybe. It's one sea area, it borders, I don't know how many centers there for, and 2 of them are mine, so.
Yes, and frankly, the West Coast Washington, D.C. fleet is completely useless for anything except attacking you.
Yeah, exactly. It's a giveaway, basically. Yeah, once that fleet goes in there, it can kind of go nowhere else.
Kind of the most aggressive build he could possibly have chosen.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was hoping I would just, move Halifax back to now, North Atlantic, and then, grab Greenland, but and maybe move Montreal to Halifax. But after the US built the way it did, I'm like, okay, now I have to play this differently. So there was a lot of struggle, actually, in the early game with the United States, and also in the Caribbean, with you. It was a very interesting game early on.
Anything interesting about the builds in South America for you?
Yeah, so what happened here was that a couple of things, I guess. First, Chile builds a fleet in Talca, which it's great for me, right? If Chile builds armies in Santiago and in Talca, then he can get both in Mendoza and Aysén and just grab Patagonia in the fall of 42. Cool. So, yeah, that was definitely a positive development there, that I didn't have to worry about the Malvinas. At the same time, I couldn't build in the Malvinas because, I was feeling the heat from the USA, and also I knew that after I took Puerto Rico, things between us wouldn't go down well. So I just couldn't afford to reinforce the Malvinas. And I think that's what ended up costing both of those centers to me later on. The fact that I just was not in a position to build in the Malvinas. On the other hand, as much as it's nice to have centers in South America, from a big picture perspective, it's not going to win you the game.
It's not that important for Britain.
Exactly. So I chose to reinforce my north. Still a good sign from Chile there. And then, Argentina and Brazil have already started the game fighting. So also good for me that they are fighting, because it means that also Argentina is not going to be incentivized actually to come after me. Looking at the center, I think I was kind of surprised actually by Brazil building an army in Sao Paulo, because Brazil already had a front with Venezuela, and now, Venezuela can walk into Para. I mean, yeah, it's just a bit of a tough position, I think, for Brazil at this point.
Brazil has ongoing conflict with Argentina, ongoing conflict with Venezuela at the opposite end of his country, and potentially a fight with Peru, because Peru moved into Santa Cruz, which is right next to Brazil.
Yeah. Even though I should say, I think in this map, actually, Peru can guarantee Santa Cruz if it opens the right way in the first spring, right? If Peru opens to Beni and La Paz. But Peru didn't do that, actually. But regardless, in the end, Peru is in Santa Cruz now. Things are not looking very good for Brazil. And New Granada builds a fleet in Cali West Coast, which I believe is also something that I had asked him at the time, and it's a good thing for me, right? The fewer fleets there are in the Caribbean, the better off I am. I mean, that's true for you too. But I think in this particular scenario, I am the one who's facing the North and South America, right? So fleets in Cartagena or like Caracas can only be bad for me and good for you. So I was pretty excited to actually see that none of them built a fleet there.
Very frustrating for me that neither Venezuela nor New Granada is interested at all in building fleets, yet Mexico is.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, Mexico split on the other hand, pretty good thing for me. I'm excited to see that. Yeah. Mexico also now is in position to get Guatemala. So overall, I would say, Mexico is actually having a very positive outlook for the second year.
Yeah, Mexico is doing well, I think. Going to spring 1842.
That was an interesting opening here, actually. Yeah, did you want to actually give me your own thoughts? Because I thought I definitely didn't expect you to move to East Caribbean at this time.
I was thinking I was going to bounce with you.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty hilarious. I'm like, okay, I was thinking about it. What do I do? Do I open North Caribbean? Like if I open North Caribbean, then I'm in a pretty good position. If I don't open in North Caribbean, like there is no way he's going to like support himself with 3 units this Caribbean. And obviously I was wrong about that because you sent everything in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I threw everything I had at East Caribbean. And that turned out not to have been the best decision here, obviously.
Yeah. No, that was I think painful for you the way things turned out over here, because I got into North Caribbean, which borders 3 of your centers, 2 of them home centers, and then because you actually open Canal Viejo, I get a free shot at Havana as well. So I'm like, okay, this is actually looking pretty good. Like Spain in East Caribbean, maybe not the best thing for me, but I can still cover my centers. And I can like take a shot at one of Spain's centers. So actually, yeah, this is looking kind of promising for me. I think my only fear there was actually dislodging you. So if I recall, I didn't actually dislodge you. I believe Venezuela was actually kind of annoyed because he was like, you told me you were going to cover East Caribbean. Why Spain in East Caribbean right now? I mean, I told Venezuela at the time, I don't think that Spain is going to go for Caracas, but Venezuela was not very happy. And then, yeah, meanwhile, up north, I mean, it was expected now that the US is going to be a pain in my backside, right? So after he built in DC West Coast, so the US and I bounced in DC. I was thinking, okay, what do I do with Halifax? If I open in North Atlantic, then I leave myself kind of wide open there. If I open in New England, depending on what the US does, I can at least threaten New York. And meanwhile, the US cannot actually cover New York from Washington DC West Coast, so I did have that going for me. So bounce, and then I did actually get into New England over there. The US gets into the Erie Canal, but I couldn't bounce the US outside of both the lakes and the Erie Canal. And while the Erie Canal is important, what is much more important is actually the lakes. So I had to bounce the lakes and allow him to get into the Erie. And if he did, then I actually got into New England. I had that going for me. I could threaten New York. And then meanwhile, looking at the diplomacy elsewhere, I was pushing Mexico at this point, to open against the US. And I told him, hey, you just cannot allow Texas to get into Chihuahua. If he does, you're kind of done. I mean, Chihuahua borders all 3 home centers of Mexico. And as I was saying before, Venezuela actually sent a message to Mexico that I think really convinced Mexico to work with me. My understanding is that Mexico actually was very skeptical about working with me because Mexico suspected that I'm a fair player. And I think that's the main reason why he didn't want to work with me, actually, from what he told me. But he was convinced by Venezuela finally to move on the US because the US was getting too strong. And, once the US got Canada, I mean, where else will the US go? Mexico, it's kind of like natural. At that point, luckily, Mexico, opened also in Gulf of Mexico. Meanwhile, the US actually moved to Tennessee Valley, which leaves Texas unattended, right? So now Mexico can can get Texas without even having to use 3 of its units. Mexico can get Texas just by using Apacheria and Chihuahua. And at that point, the US actually got very frustrated at Mexico and told me, okay, I'm going to go full on against Mexico. He told me that he was going to make a bunch of moves against Mexico after the resolution of this phase. And I said, okay, let's see it. But that really turned the tide there, the fact that Mexico actually made a move on Texas because the US was really unhappy about it. So that was a big help for me in this year, together with the unexpected move in succeeding in the North Caribbean.
Were you going to actually stop fighting USA if he did go after Mexico?
I think you will see later what happened, but I was definitely going to give the US some time to move away from me. But I mean, the US had lied to me twice at this point, right? So the US first opened in New England when it told me it wouldn't open to New England, and then it built a fleet in Washington, D.C. West Coast when it told me it wouldn't build a fleet there. So I had there were already 2 strikes from the US. So it was hard for me to see not fighting the US sooner or later because I just knew I couldn't trust the US after he had lied twice to me.
Some people are fundamentally untrustworthy that way.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, 1 strike, I can get over 1 strike. 2 strikes, it's not a good sign. But I was going to let the US move away from me. I was going to give the US a chance to move away from me, right? Like you also, once somebody gets stabbed, and they tell you, hey, I'm just going to send everything the other way, you don't want to immediately move on them. Typically, I think you want to give them a chance to actually move away, because that will help you and maybe establish a little bit of trust from their side. And if you're still planning on moving on them, still better to build a little bit of trust and start them a little more effectively later on than make a move right away, to be honest.
Agreed. I think that covers what was going on in the north. Anything of interest in your mind in the south this season?
The south, kind of like expected moves in general. I moved to Folta Current there. I thought about maybe moving to Bahia Blanca, but that would just make Argentina's life hard. And I was thinking, I don't really want to threaten Argentina here. Venezuela was my ally. If I mess with Argentina, then Venezuela will be annoyed at me because both of them are fighting Brazil. So I had no incentive there to do that. Meanwhile, Argentina was kind enough to bounce Chile out of Mendoza. And I remember that Chile and Argentina actually were not really talking to each other. So that was a good thing for me too. But like Argentina told me, I'm just going to bounce Mendoza because I don't trust Chile. And I was like, okay, that's great, because it means Chile is not going to get into Mendoza. Other than that, here, Peru actually, that's pretty interesting, right? Peru makes actually a full-on attack on New Granada at this point. I remember, actually, this is kind of key. I remember really hard diplomatically pushing New Granada not to go for Nicaragua. I was telling him, hey, like the US is about to eat me alive. I'm already fighting Mexico. If you don't let Nicaragua for me, I'm doomed. Please leave it for me. And New Granada actually obliged, kind of surprisingly. He didn't go for Nicaragua, even though he could have gotten, or he could have threatened it at least. And I was telling him, hey, I'm going to probably get it in spring. He was like, well, you shouldn't get it in spring. It's probably better for you to get it in fall. But in the end, New Granada didn't actually go for it, which was helpful, even though in the end, I think I didn't actually ever get Nicaragua in this game. So I was feeling a little bad because I convinced New Granada not to go for Nicaragua, and then and then I didn't get Nicaragua myself. So, and then New Granada got attacked full on by Peru, which was not maybe ideal, right? Ideally, you want to keep the balances. You don't want Peru to actually come out too strong against New Granada and do very well against it. But I think New Granada ended up actually playing a solid defense there anyway. And then some funny moves in the south, like Chile moving to Potosi and Peru moving to Tarapacá. That seemed like a bit of a mess there. I asked actually Chile why he did that, why he moved to Potosi, and he told me it was a miscalculation. I mean, if Chile wanted to take Argentina, he should have moved to Tucumán, right? And then Peru moving to Tarapacá also doesn't show good faith towards Chile. But I didn't mind any of that, actually. The more chaos on the board, the better, right? As long as it's not in your area.
South America is absolutely nuts this year. I understand why Peru is moving the way he is. He's being very aggressive, and I think he shouldn't be aggressive in two directions at once. Yeah. I think attacking New Granada full out is a good play, because New Granada won't have any ally to help him fight Peru. But if he does that, then he can't simultaneously antagonize Chile by going back to Tarapacá.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, that was kind of poor play diplomatically, I think, for Peru there. Yeah. But the move to bounce Gulf of Panama obviously was a good one, at least in some ways. But I think overall it was actually a pretty good move because he also trapped the Panama army where it was. Yeah,
his tactical play has been pretty good so far.
Yeah, decent. But it's just, as you say, alliance-wise, he seems to be kind of antagonizing all of his neighbors, both in year one and year two.
Yes, he's not doing so much against Brazil, I think, but the problem is Brazil's not really in great shape.
Right. He's definitely letting Brazil fight it out, but I think that's a good thing for Peru, right? Because if actually Peru starts, bothering Brazil falls faster, that benefits mostly Argentina and Venezuela. It doesn't really benefit Peru much. So I think that was good play out of Peru there.
Yes. Go into the fall.
Yeah. In the fall. Yeah, go ahead.
Mexico finally attacks USA and also me.
Right. So that was when really my relationship with Mexico started to heat up quite a bit, right? Like we really started to kick it there. Mexico actually asked me, can I have Havana? And I said, well, sure. Why don't you grab Havana? I didn't tell Mexico I was also going to make a move for Santiago, but what I was thinking was, I'm going to let Mexico have Havana because that definitely takes a center out of Spain. And I was thinking most likely Spain is going to go for the Bahamas, so I can also jump into Santiago de Cuba because Spain is probably going to expect me to go for Havana and he's not going to expect Mexico to go for Havana. So, in that way, hey, we can grab even more Spanish centers and we can Spain even further. Plus, strong Mexico is not a bad thing for me, right? I do want Mexico actually to be strong. So Mexico goes for Havana. He also grabs Texas. The USA just as promised, makes like a full retreat and, goes like 100% moves everything towards Mexico. And I play it safe, right? I kind of like protect Halifax there, and then I don't make any other aggressive moves. I don't move to the Erie or anything like that. The only aggressive move that I make towards the USA is move to Michigan, which is a move that I can actually sell to the USA as, hey, I did everything you told me, but I just had to have a fail-safe there in case he actually didn't follow through. So I moved to Michigan, and the US is actually okay with that. I mean, he was not very happy about the move to Michigan, but it was not a deal breaker with him, given that I followed through with everything else. So that, gives me some options for the next year without antagonizing the USA too much. Yeah, looking at the Caribbean, you moved to West Caribbean. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I am just trying to kind of outguess you at this point, because the tactical play is my only play left. I've lost the strategic game. I've lost the diplomatic game. You guys have me surrounded. I'm just trying to keep you out of my centers as long as possible and maybe snatch a dot or two on the way. So my thinking is, I can't take Jamaica right now. Most likely you would bounce me, which is actually the way you move.
Yeah.
If you're going to bounce me in Jamaica, it means you're vacating West Caribbean. So maybe I can get into West Caribbean and East Caribbean at the same time. And if I can do that, then I would probably be able to take Jamaica from you. And if I couldn't take Jamaica from you, at least I have some leverage. Maybe I can get you to back off or give back Havana or something.
Yeah.
And at the least now I'm in position maybe to just take Nicaragua.
Yeah, I think this was a good play from you. I mean, this is always a question, right? When you're in a situation like this, you always think, should I cover my center? Most likely the other person is not going to go for my center, because if they bounce me there, then I can build. So most likely the play that Spain is going to make is go to West Caribbean. Sorry, go anywhere else but Jamaica. I couldn't have known you to go to West Caribbean. But what I was thinking is, can I really risk it? And I remember the other thing in the end I decided was, I have to try and dislodge you out of East Caribbean. So I think Puerto Rico there supported Trinidad into East Caribbean. And, given that I was actually planning to do that, there was no way I could afford to actually have you retreat into Jamaica if I didn't cover it, right? So I had to cover Jamaica because I was planning to try and dislodge you out of it. You also surprised me when you actually went for Santiago. I think that was a very good play from your side. But you actually saw that Mexico and I were going to coordinate, I think, here. So you made the move to cover it.
Yeah, as I said before, I was pretty suspicious that Mexico was just on your side by this point. And I was glad that at least I had the strategic sense to figure that out, albeit that it was just in time to save one of my centers, leaving with only a single one of my home centers at this point.
Yeah, definitely painful. Yeah, I mean, at this point, I think at this year, I didn't actually gain any centers. I cannot remember what happened in the South, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I didn't gain any centers, but it was actually key that you lost the center by losing Havana, because at this point, any unit that you destroy is good for me.
Let's talk about anything interesting happening in the South.
Yeah. So at this point, I actually suspected that Chile would go for Magallanes. That was a pretty hilarious play, I have to say. But because, I could have just... So Chile could either go for Drake Passage or Magallanes, right, if it wanted to come after me. And the most likely play is Drake Passage. I mean, Drake Passage is a very important territory in the map. And I'm like, okay, if Chile goes for Drake Passage and I go for Magallanes, then I lose the Malvinas, pretty much, right? The Falklands. Because in the spring, Chile is in Drake Passage, that's adjacent to Malvinas, I've lost them. But Chile actually didn't go for Drake Passage, and I guessed him correctly there. I think he expected me to think that I would go for, he expected me to go for Drake Passage, so he went for Magallanes, and I actually read him, and we bounced there, which was pretty hilarious. I don't think, you're not going to see a bounce in Magallanes often in the early game, I think.
No, I agree.
So at this point, it becomes pretty clear that Chile is out to get my southern possessions. Meanwhile, Argentina thankfully still bounces Chile and Mendoza. Chile unfortunately gets the Galapagos, but that was, I think, expected, right? It was expected that New Granada would actually go for Hawaii. Peru gets Ecuador. So the battle between New Granada and Peru, we start to heat up over here. And then Argentina makes some rather weird moves, to be honest. It supports Mato Grosso into Rio Grande. And then Argentina actually jumps into Mato Grosso. So that was a pretty odd turn of events, like the moves of Argentina at this point. And then, Venezuela covers Caracas because you were in East Caribbean, and also goes for Para, which is, I think, a good move because now Venezuela can actually grab Manaus, but also can threaten Sao Salvador, which is suddenly, unoccupied.
Yes.
So, yeah,
For Brazil.
exactly. Yeah, pretty rough year for Brazil.
Going to the retreats phase, we see that New Granada goes to Caquetá.
And Argentina to Asunción over there, yeah.
Oh, yes. I forgot he had a retreat.
Yeah.
And in the build phase...
I didn't build anything. I didn't gain any centers actually that year, yeah.
You didn't gain anything. Mexico got a few builds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mexico gets 3 builds here. A pretty great year for Mexico, right? Havana, Guatemala, and Texas. And is very well set to hit the USA. And frankly, at this point, Mexico is looking like the North American leader, right? It's in a very strong position.
Yes.
Yeah. New Granada builds an army, I think, in Cali over there, which is, coming handy in Bogota, actually. I think, it managed to move Panama to Cali and build an army in Bogota. And I believe Venezuela at this point builds an army in Angostura because it had to cover Caracas because you were in East Caribbean, which means that, Venezuela cannot build a fleet in East Caribbean. So actually that was a good thing for me too, in part by chance.
He could have built a fleet in Maracaibo, but I guess he was not interested in becoming a Caribbean naval power just yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the focus of Venezuela at this point is to kill Brazil quickly.
To the south, anything interesting here before we move on to spring?
I think Chile building an army. So Chile got one build, right? But it built an army in Talca. And at this point, given that I didn't get any builds, I think if I had got any build, I would have actually built it in the Malvinas. But since I didn't get a build at this point, Chile getting a build from the Galapagos and building in Talca, that's pretty much the end of my southern possessions at this point. I wasn't nervous of Brazil actually going for Patagonia because I was, even though I was friendly with Argentina, I was talking with Brazil quite a bit as well. And Brazil had assured me, that, he would actually go for Buenos Aires or some Argentinian centers. But at this point, I knew that with Chile building, I wouldn't be able to hold on to either Patagonia or the Malvinas in the long run.
Yes, that's... Unfortunately, I can see that reality too.
Any comments from you?
Oh, no, I was paying very little attention to the south at this point, frankly.
Yeah, makes sense, yeah.
Hi, folks. Florida Man here with a small interjection. Just wanted to suggest, if you made it this far into the video, you must have liked it. I mean, you must have enjoyed it. So you should probably click the like button if you haven't already, like about 70 or 80% of the people who are watching. You know who you are. Go on. Now back to your regularly scheduled enjoyment. Going to the new spring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My position continues to deteriorate.
I was looking at the order history today, actually. And I noticed that I think you put an illegal order there for Santo Domingo to move to North Caribbean. I'm not sure if that was on purpose or not. Are you going to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that was just a mistake. I think I'm going to move it to East Caribbean just to try and bounce you again.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, at this point, so you destroyed...
The Haiti unit.
Haiti, right. You destroyed Haiti, which was surprising to me, actually. I thought that you were probably going to destroy West Caribbean. And at this point, I had actually already promised Nicaragua to Mexico. So I'm like, I'm not going to go for Nicaragua, Nicaragua is yours. This is part of our alliance, Havana has to go to you and Nicaragua has to go to you. They're both centers kind of like, in the west of the Caribbean. I just want to get everything else. And Mexico was cool with that. So yeah, you destroyed Haiti. And at the time I thought I can go for Santiago and bounce, or I can go for Haiti. If I go for Haiti, I think that Spain is not going to expect me to actually go for Haiti. Spain might expect me to go for Santiago. And at the same time, I can also support myself to East Caribbean now. West Caribbean bounces me, which didn't happen. So overall, this whole thing actually, I think, worked out pretty well for me going to Haiti, because now I also had 2 on Santo Domingo, and I got into Sargasso. I did expect you to bounce me in one of the sea areas, that I made the move towards, but in the end, that didn't happen. So that was pretty helpful. And then in the north, actually, before I go in the north, you're going to talk about a little bit your own moves?
Oh, at this point, I'm in such a bad situation that I can see my position in the center is going to be slowly crushed. So I'm trying to sort of scatter and grab dots wherever I can to just keep myself alive for now.
Yeah, it does make sense that you went for the Bahamas at this point. And then, yeah, looking back north, the USA is making a move full on attack on Mexico. And, for good or bad, I actually make a move in the USA, right? I go to...
Chicago.
Yeah, I walk into Chicago, while I convince the USA to go to Tennessee Valley, because Tennessee Valley can support New Orleans, right? So I do that, and the US, gets pretty mad at me. And to be honest, I may have actually moved on the US a little too soon. I probably should have waited until the US had moved a little more solidly to the West. But yeah, Mexico at this point was pushing me to return the favor. The US also moves to Arctic, going for Alaska. And at the time, I remember, I was thinking, well, if I let the US make a couple of moves towards Alaska, then that fleet is never going to bother me again, and I can probably get Greenland next year. But if I move on the US now, I'm not going to be able to. I still move on the US. Perhaps a bit of a too poor choice there. In the end, it didn't work. It did work out in the end, but actually that move made my life against the US much harder. On the other hand, I really needed a build from somewhere. I didn't have any guaranteed builds, I think, from you up north. In the end, I did end up getting a few. But I was also expecting I was going to lose Patagonia in the south, so I needed at least 2 centers, because I was going to lose Patagonia just so that I can build one. And I thought that was part of the reason why I ended up moving against the US at that point.
Well, I think it's a very good move set on your part. I think that in diplomacy, in warfare, there comes a certain point where you should just act with boldness against your chosen adversary rather than trying to, wait for them to lower their guard further. I think if you had waited, it would have been a mistake, because I think it would have probably weakened your relationship with Mexico.
Yeah, that's true. Mexico did move on the US as promised, and if I had waited, Mexico would not have been happy. And at this point, I was actually looking at Mexico as my primary ally for this game.
I can feel that looking at this map and thinking about how it develops as the game goes on too.
Yeah, exactly. The other move here was moving into the Great Lakes, right? So I moved to Chicago and I moved to the Eastern Great Lakes because, at this point, the US has a couple of units on Chicago. If I move to the Great Lakes, I can either support Chicago to hold, or I have the option of supporting myself into Washington, D.C., especially if NYC moves out, which it didn't. So overall, it gives me some options there. It was as good as it could have been, given the US moves.
Yeah, I think things are going pretty well for you. Yeah, going to the south, looks like New Granada strikes back, retakes Ecuador.
Yeah,
Venezuela is starting to really put the pressure on Brazil.
Yeah, I mean, Venezuela, is definitely making some moves there. Brazil itself is, trading centers with Argentina there, and Argentina has gotten into Bahia, the Paranagua, and I think that fleet there is death for Brazil. Once a fleet gets into there, things are very hard for Brazil. I mean, Brazil was just doing very poorly anyway, to be fair, at this point. And then, excellent defense from New Granada, actually. So New Granada, both this turn and the next turn, plays very well against Peru, which really helps delay Peru. Peru, meanwhile, in my view, doesn't play a very concerted strategy because, it moves to Mato Grosso. I mean, Mato Grosso has a lot of benefits, right? But Peru has like 3 armies there that are not operating against New Granada. So Peru has 3 armies that are operating in the center of the map. And at least at this point, they're not really doing much. I believe, actually, Peru will get Belo Horizonte here in the fall. If I recall, Argentina supported Peru in, which is, one gain from Peru. But it's a gain for Peru that is really far away. So, it will get a build out of it. But then it's not a unit that can actually help Peru in the war that it's actually fighting. So, and just another interesting part here. Chile does not bounce Hawaii outside of the Mid-Pacific Ocean, which is, it means that, Chile and Peru are kind of friendly, but Chile is not really that friendly to Peru that it's going to help Peru against New Granada directly.
Going to the retreats. Peru retreats to Gulf of Guayaquil. This is the fall. This is when the position in my island centers is completely collapsed. I'm guaranteed to lose Santiago pretty shortly, and you are starting to consolidate your position.
Yeah, I actually remember this particular turn. I expected you to support Santo Domingo to Sargasso, and I thought about it. I'm like, okay, if I don't allow that to happen, so I did have the option of supporting Sargasso with 3 fleets into Santo Domingo, right? And that would not have allowed you to actually dislodge Sargasso. And I thought about it. And like, okay, if I do that, then the downside is that Spain is going to retreat into Canal Viejo, and Canal Viejo borders, Santiago. But if I let Spain dislodge Sargasso, which I thought you were going to do, that actually gives me the benefit, the positional benefit, because there is no Spanish fleet into Canal Viejo. And it did happen that way. So that ended up working out for me at the time. And then, up north, I just chose to support Chicago to hold. Maybe a mistake. Maybe I should have gone for Washington D.C. In retrospect, because the USA for some reason decided to move to Iowa. As I said, the US now is mad at me.
Yeah, the US is playing it pretty badly for being mad at you, honestly.
Yeah, the American moves here were not. I mean, he did support New Orleans, which was key, but overall, yeah, the American moves are not very good here. He did move to Labrador, which is, I think, also a weird move, right? Like, I mean, it's better off for the US to move to North Atlantic so that they can actually threaten Halifax. Moving to Labrador is just not a good move, to be honest. Yeah.
Mexico continuing to do well against the US. Let's go to South America. I think if I'm looking at it from your perspective here, it's sad to be losing Patagonia, but you knew it was going to happen. But the great thing is that this continues to be one of the most chaotic South American maps I've ever seen. The game that Peru made against New Granada is now back in New Granada's hands. Brazil is trading dots with Argentina. Peru has Belo Horizonte, which is way out of position for him to hold. And the only person who's really just making unambiguous gains here is Venezuela, who's your ally.
Yeah, that's right. Which is, not a great thing. I mean, you don't want your ally to do too well, right? But it is what it is. It's funny that Brazil actually ends into Buenos Aires, so that's not great for Argentina. It is kind of good for me, I guess, to see, that Brazil is not out of the game completely yet. But again, it's actually pretty bad for Argentina. And then looking up north, yeah, I mean, here, New Granada makes a great guess, right? And the guess is Peru is not going to go for Panama. So Peru ends up going for Cali. New Granada ends up holding in Cali. And all of that is actually pretty bad for Peru, which ended up losing a center. So Peru has spent like 3 years here fighting New Granada and has nothing to show for it, right? Because it hasn't even kept Ecuador. And usually, I think Galapagos goes to Peru, but Peru does not even control Galapagos, actually, because it was so focused on New Granada. So not a great year. And I think, yeah, overall, the big game for Peru was not very favorable at this point.
I don't think so either. You retreated to Puerto Rico, which I don't think that really requires explanation.
Yeah,
that island needs defending, and the other option was just, well, the other options were retreating to Mid-Atlantic, Anegada Passage, East Caribbean, and
or North Atlantic, actually.
Yeah, or North Atlantic.
Yeah, that could have maybe helped me a little bit, but I mean, I had to, if I retreat anywhere that is not adjacent to Puerto Rico, I lose Puerto Rico. So I just couldn't afford that, yeah.
In the builds phase, you get Montreal.
Yeah, I think I built that army over there. Yeah, hoping to send it to the Erie or maybe convoy it across the canal. I can't remember what I ended up doing, but it gives me some options. The army in Montreal. I think I only got that one build, or did I just get one build? Oh no, I also built a fleet in Halifax. So
yes,
yeah, that was my other build. So army Montreal, fleet Halifax, so that I can keep the US outside of North Atlantic.
And Mexico gets a fleet in Guadalajara.
This is Mexico's, I guess, second Pacific build at this point, right? Because it already has a fleet in Baja. So I don't even remember why Mexico moved to Baja, to be honest. Yeah, but
he's
Mexico
up the coast. He's going to take all the west coast. So
yeah, probably Mexico moved to Baja so that it can then move to Alta California. That's my guess.
I think so.
And I think, do you destroy a unit? You don't destroy a unit, actually, but your units are just disjointed at this point. So that's a hard position to be in.
Yeah, I can tell my position's getting worse. I mean, at this point, I think I was trying to negotiate with you some way I could stay alive.
Yeah, you were. And then the other thing that happened here, by the way, is that New Granada actually asks me and asks Venezuela also, do you think that Venezuela is going to be willing to pass me a center? I can't remember which center it was, that one. Maybe Angostura. And, Venezuela gets furious by that, actually. So we didn't comment on that, but in the last move, Venezuela actually supports itself into Amazonia. And now New Granada suddenly has to face both Venezuela and Peru. And I think that's, New Granada was doing great, but once you have to face two of your neighbors, the defense gets much, much harder.
Yes.
Yeah, so Venezuela builds a fleet in Maracaibo, and New Granada builds a fleet in Cartagena, but they're both to fight each other. So again, it's not something that really concerns me at this point. I'm a little worried that, Venezuela is going to eat New Granada alive together with Peru, but it will take time. Actually, New Granada has a pretty solid defensive position, and, it takes a few moves for Venezuela actually to get in place.
Going to the next spring, what were your thoughts at this point?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I remember that you actually sent me a message and you asked me if I wanted you to be my Janissary. Is that right? And do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's just something I sometimes do when I'm dying, trying to be kept alive as someone's Janissary, knowing that you can't win if you're dead, and that there's always a chance to come back if you're still alive.
Yeah.
And, I'm ready to do what I can to try and help you to establish your dominance position if I can keep myself alive and ideally keep from shrinking any further by doing so.
Yeah, I remember that you had actually sent me some pretty entertaining messages at the time. I will always take any offer for help, right? Like if there is any offer for help for me, especially if it involves minimal risk, I will take it. So, at this point, I think you made the offer to be my Janissary, and I said, okay, let's do it. Like help me out against the US, some goodwill, and let's see how that goes. And you did actually, right? I think you moved to the Antilles, which I asked you to move to the Antilles current over there, and you did do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you also moved to North Atlantic, which was also helpful for me because I had the US in Labrador, and the US could either move to North Atlantic or to Gulf of Lawrence. You moved to North Atlantic. Actually, it's funny. I was expecting the US to move to Quebec at the time. I was like almost certain he was going to move to Quebec. But I'm like, okay, even if he moves to Quebec, that's not a big deal. If I move to Gulf of Lawrence, I can still cover Montreal. But if he gets into Gulf of Lawrence, that threatens two of my sentences, and I just cannot allow that to happen. So, yeah, you follow through.
Tactically speaking, you and Mexico are really eating USA alive. USA is in a full tactical retreat. He's trying to go for Alaska at this point, which is very kind of desperate for some war with two of his neighbors.
I mean, the US here, I think the US played a good move here, and that was that it supported Iowa into Chicago. And I sweated over this quite a bit. I'm like, okay, what should I do here? Should I support Chicago? Should I go for Washington, D.C.? I'm like, okay, the US may actually think that I think that he's going to go to Ontario to get Toronto, and he may, for that reason, go for Chicago. And I don't know if that was in the US's mind, but the US did go for Chicago at this point. And I support Chicago to hold, so that saves me from losing Chicago there. At the same time, I moved New England down to Gulfstream and Montreal to Erie Canal, thinking that because the US had actually moved to New England the last turn, I was thinking, well, maybe the US is going to go for it again. And, if he does, then I have 2 units on New York. And if he doesn't, I don't think it's a big deal because either way, if I bounce Gulf of Lawrence, I'm not going to have to worry about Halifax. And all of that ends up working out. So I read the US, I think, 100% there.
He had pretty limited options.
Yeah, he did have pretty limited options. Yeah, and meanwhile, the US, I thought that the US would actually try to bounce Alta California, for example, right?
That's what I thought as well.
Yeah, but instead the US just goes for Alaska and just, abandons Oregon, which I wasn't happy to see, frankly. I mean, I was hoping that, Mexico wouldn't get any more easy bills from the US, and I also thought that the US would probably try and bounce Gulf of Mexico, but the US didn't bounce Gulf of Mexico either. So the US really just gave a free ride to Mexico at this point. And I wasn't super happy about that, but diplomacy is diplomacy and those things happen. You cannot control everything that goes on the board.
Yeah, USA clearly more concerned about you than about Mexico at this point.
South America, that's another thing that happened, by the way. There, you moved to Almirante Bay and you abandoned Nicaragua. So Mexico got a third free center. So Mexico got 3 free centers essentially this year. I mean, I was hoping that you would bounce West Caribbean, to be honest, at this point. But, that didn't happen. Then, you moving to Almirante Bay means that New Granada is in a really, really tough position now. And I think at this point, New Granada actually surrenders. I think there were a couple of NMRs by New Granada, and then New Granada actually dropped after this year.
I was figuring that I was inevitably going to lose Nicaragua to Mexico, and that if you supported him into West Caribbean, there was nothing I could do to bounce him. I might as well take my shot and try to sneak into Panama or something.
Yeah, no, I mean, it kind of made sense. I think you could have kept West Caribbean there, Nicaragua, but I think you told me at the time that you expected me to actually support Mexico into West Caribbean. I didn't do that. Maybe I should have actually told you, but I wasn't sure that you could actually trust me anyway, if I told you, to be honest.
Yeah. It would have helped a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
And elsewhere, I think the only really interesting thing to note here is that Brazil's really dying now. Brazil's really going to disappear, and then we're going to have to see what the dynamic is without Brazil. It's looking like Chile is going to invade Argentina, and Peru is still kind of grappling with New Granada, along with Venezuela grappling with New Granada.
Yeah, what's even more interesting, actually, Peru here moves away from New Granada, right? It actually moves out of Gulf of Panama, and I think I think I may have actually helped convince Peru to move, or I tried to convince Peru to move away from New Granada in a pretty covert way. I kept telling Peru, hey, you have been fighting New Granada for like 3-4 years now. You have nothing to show out of it. The only one and Peru was asking me, what do you think I should do? And I was like, well, the only one who's gaining out of this is anybody but you. And obviously, I didn't want Venezuela to do well and destroy New Granada. And I think in the end, it was actually helpful that Peru moved away. But at the same time, then you moved to Almirante Bay. So one problem went away for New Granada, another problem came in. So not a great year for New Granada.
Certainly not.
Yeah, and New Granada also moved out of Gulf of Chiriquí there, moved to mid-Pacific Ocean, because I think it was afraid that Chile would go for Hawaii. Chile, meanwhile, doesn't go for Hawaii, but then New Granada doesn't have that fleet anymore in position to cover Panama. So bad news for New Granada. Brazil is falling apart, as you say, and Chile is making a pretty strong push against Argentina, who's actually playing pretty mediocre defense, to be honest. Yeah.
Argentina, too focused on killing off Brazil to really work very much on defense, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Plus, Argentina lost Buenos Aires at some point, which was pretty bad for Argentina because it means Argentina cannot build any more fleets. Other than that, I expected Chile to go for Falkland current there, but I knew that whatever happened, I would lose the Malvinas this year. So I decided to go for South Atlantic just because it's a more strategic position. It borders mid-Atlantic and I can use it to delay Chile further. Because actually at this point, I'm seeing Chile and Venezuela as the two, big players in South America, but Venezuela is my ally, and I kind of have a duty towards him to actually delay Chile as much as possible.
Going to the fall.
In the fall, I remember that I convinced you to go for Charleston, and you did go for Charleston, so that was pretty hilarious. I remember Mexico laughing at this, and I didn't take much credit for it. I did say, hey, I did tell Spain, hey, why don't you go for Charleston? I told him, I was surprised that Spain did actually go for it, because I didn't want to say that you were my Janissary at this point. And then I remember also asking you to go for the Arctic so that I can get a fleet in North Atlantic. And I remember you saying, so now I am going to be banished to the Arctic or something like that.
Exiled to Antarctica.
Yeah, exactly.
Arctic.
exactly, yeah. But you did follow through as well. Maybe the mistake I made there is, and I don't know if it was a mistake really, I just went for Washington DC. I was thinking, I either keep Chicago or I take DC. If the US plays this, wrongly, then I can maybe keep both of them. That didn't exactly work out. I did lose Chicago, but I did gain DC, and I also gained New York. So still, I gained one. Plus, I got Santiago and Bahamas from you, which I believe is a total of 4. So that was a pretty big year for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So very nice year for you.
Yeah, that was a great year. Mexico, meanwhile. Yeah, Mexico is also gaining 3, so Mexico and I are definitely dominating the northern part of the map at this point.
Yeah, at this point, it's completely under your dominion.
Yeah. And New Granada, meanwhile, still plays some good defense there. It's funny to see. Yeah, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, still saves Panama, loses Ecuador by a surprise attack from Peru, who had kind of backed away. And I believe now this was the replacement for New Granada at this point. And the replacement of New Granada was really asking me that I move against Venezuela and get Caracas, but it was too soon for me to make a stab on Venezuela at this point. Yeah, plus Venezuela. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that makes sense to me because you're still finishing off the United States, although pretty soon I think you'll be very solid stabbing Venezuela.
Yeah. But the other thing was Venezuela and Mexico and I were all allies, right? So it was hard for me to stab Venezuela without triggering a response from Mexico as well, because at this point maybe Mexico would think I'm going for the solo. So I had to be cautious there.
Not much else interesting to comment on in South America. I think just continuing the trends we noticed in the spring.
Yeah, I lose the Malvinas actually, so I think I don't gain 4, I gain 3, and then just Argentina at this point starts losing pretty badly from Chile.
Yes,
and importantly, Venezuela doesn't gain any centers, so that is also a bit of a help for me.
That is true. That's good for you for potential stabbing opportunities. This is the retreat. New Granada retreats to Gulf of Panama, and in the build phase.
Yeah, I built 3. I leave Trinidad empty there, I think, as a sign of goodwill towards Venezuela. I do build in Jamaica because I kind of have to build somewhere. Yeah, I also build in Montreal and Halifax. And at this point, it's mostly fleets for me because, the game for me at this point is, if I build more armies, Mexico is going to be unhappy. And I need to take out Greenland and maybe start, moving towards the south. At this point, Venezuela and I are discussing that we have to stop Chile. So I'm focusing on fleets, and the deal I have with Venezuela is kind of like, in the Western Treaty, maybe in the main map, maybe just in the England-France alliance. England is putting the fleets, France is putting the armies, and that's kind of like the deal I have with Venezuela. Venezuela is putting the armies, I'm putting the fleets, and we're going to stop Chile together while he takes out New Granada.
Excellent. That sounds like a very good plan from Venezuela's perspective. We'll see if you end up sticking with that.
Yeah.
That's probably all that was noteworthy in the builds. Going to spring, you are pretty effectively surrounding Greenland while also retaking Chicago, and while Mexico is clearly about to take Alaska.
Yeah. So the U.S. destroys Alaska, and the U.S. also destroys Iowa and Chicago in the build phase, which I think I was a little surprised. I didn't think he would destroy Chicago, and he keeps Greenland. And and the unit, he had a fleet in Florida, right? So he keeps a fleet in Florida, and he keeps
New England.
Yeah. I mean, New England is such a useless position at this point because the fleet cannot even go to Montreal or the Canal, as we discussed before. So it's just trapped in there. I read the US correctly there, and I get into the Arctic successfully and support myself into North Atlantic, and I think that signals the end of Greenland as well. And I think this is the end of the US at this point, right? Because he loses Chicago, he will lose Alaska. So that's that. Yeah, so here it's interesting, and this is hilarious, but so here New Granada asks me to move to Gulf of Venezuela and East Caribbean, and Venezuela also asks me to move to Gulf of Venezuela and East Caribbean.
I love when that happens.
It's just so funny, yeah, and I don't suggest either to them, like they both out of their own volition just ask me to do that. And, New Granada says, hey, if you move to Gulf of Venezuela, I can destroy Santa Marta. And Venezuela says, can you please move to Gulf of Venezuela so that New Granada cannot get into the Gulf of Venezuela itself? And like, sure, yeah, I'm going to do that. And of course, that leads to Venezuela losing Santa Marta. And I knew this was going to happen, but it kind of like, gets New Granada on my side and also Venezuela on my side because Venezuela asked me to move there. And now I have two units bordering two of Venezuela's home centers at Venezuela's request.
A strong ally.
Yeah, I mean, it was at his request, I just moved in there to help him, so.
You're just helping him move some stuff around in the house. You might take a few things home.
Yeah, exactly. Not the kind of friend I'm normally, but in diplomacy sometimes, yes. And then in the south, I moved to Bahia de Paranaguá, mostly just to secure that position because it's important. But otherwise, not much else happens. I mean, Peru makes a little bit of an advance against New Granada, but not too much. I think Peru makes some kind of deal with New Granada that is not going to take Cali. Chile moves to mid-Pacific Ocean, so Mexico and Chile really start actually fighting at this point, and Mexico also moves to North Pacific Ocean. So this is good for me to see because I really want somebody to antagonize Mexico, right? Otherwise, Mexico is going to get other ideas, and Mexico also moves to the south, towards like Panama, which is also a good thing for me to see. It's good for Mexico, to like get more fleets in the Pacific, but it's also good for me because I don't want many of Mexico's fleet in the area.
No, that makes sense. Mexico could. I would very much understand if Mexico wanted to just attack Great Britain at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
Here retreats. United States retreats to Florida Straits.
Yeah, not a bad thing for me. Again, it can maybe delay a little bit Mexico, or maybe force him to go to Havana. And I think the two of them bounce there. Yeah. And Mexico, by the way, moves to Florida at this point because Mexico actually wants to help me move to Charleston. And I'm like, okay, let me give Mexico a chance to actually prove that he wants to help me move to Charleston. Like I'm going to do my game, but if Mexico helps me, that's even better. It actually shows that, Mexico is actually a trustworthy ally.
I don't know how that's really a test of trust since you'd be pretty much guaranteed Charleston.
I know. We also had another conversation. Mexico was saying, maybe you can actually help me into Charleston. But then Mexico was going to get Panama anyway. I think. Maybe he doesn't. But in any case, I convinced Mexico that no, I should actually get Charleston, which was the initial split we had discussed.
Makes sense. The retreat in the south is Argentina retreating from Chile. So then we go on to the fall season.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I convinced Mexico just to, move back to New Orleans. I get Charleston from you. I think, as I told you at the time, I will always take a Janissary, but the timing has to be right. Like I cannot be using Spain against Mexico when I actually still need Mexico, because Mexico will then start asking questions like, if Spain is coming after me, why are you not doing something about Spain? So it's just that the timing really didn't work. I think if it was in the later game, I could have worked with you until the end. But yeah, it wasn't a good timing for me to stop Mexico.
I feel as if we were already close to the late game, to be honest, but I understand what you're saying.
We're close, but not exactly there. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So not much to say, I think here. It's just you guys are mopping up USA.
Exactly.
This is there's not even really at this point tactics are not required.
Exactly. Yeah, this is all easy. Yeah.
Going to the south, it's interesting that Argentina attacks Peru here. Argentina under attack by Chile takes Venezuela's support into Peru's center of Belo Horizonte.
Yeah, I had to do something with that again. I really worked hard to convince Venezuela to take Belo Horizonte or to support Argentina into it because I didn't want Peru and Venezuela actually to stay allied, right? So I'm like, okay, you have a chance here. You can actually destroy Peru's army. Destroy it. Now is the time for you. Destroy it. So then you don't have to worry about Peru staying in Mato Grosso, potentially threatening Manaus and all of that. And it did happen that way. And it was actually, it was good to undermine the relationship between Venezuela and Peru. Venezuela didn't really gain anything out of it. It just kept Argentina alive. Yeah, and the other thing that happened here, I had actually asked Brazil. So it's funny, but Brazil was talking to me. I had asked Brazil to move to Rio Grande. I was actually thinking I can get to Uruguay myself, but then Argentina said that he was going to move to Uruguay. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to let Argentina actually get it so that he can defend against Chile for a little longer. The slower Chile moves, the better off I am. So plus Chile actually makes a mistake there and loses, is about to lose Patagonia, right? Because it tries to move the Malvinas to Bahia Blanca, which is an illegal order. So now Argentina actually has a free shot at Patagonia next end.
Yes. Bill phase. Finally got a fleet in Trinidad again.
Mm-hmm. I remember, I believe I got a fleet in Trinidad because I was going to move towards mid-Atlantic, or at least that was the plan that I was discussing with Venezuela at the time. And I was surprised that he was cool with me building there, but he was. And then I built the army in Halifax, the idea being that I'm eventually going to convoy it in South America and help against Chile, actually with Venezuela's blessing. So that's the plan at this point. Yeah. Meanwhile, it's pretty interesting. At this point, I almost have a direct line to convoy that army in Halifax to Caracas. But not quite. I'm missing a fleet in North Caribbean, actually. That's the only thing that's missing to form a direct line there, or a fleet in Sargasso. At this point, I'm starting to consider my options for the late game. The other thing that happens, by the way, Mexico has an extra build here, but I convinced Mexico not to build it and save it to actually build another fleet in the Pacific next year, because it's already clear that, Mexico is fighting Chile in the Pacific and it can use another fleet. So that's helpful as well.
That does make sense. For you, especially.
For me, especially, yeah.
This season, we see a convoy. Peru gets into Baja.
Yeah, that was totally unexpected. Like, I had nothing to do with that, absolutely nothing. And to be honest, I was very surprised to see that. As surprised as Mexico was. Nobody expected this. I don't know what that gains Peru. I don't think it gains Peru anything. If anything, now Peru has even fewer units in South America. It definitely is great for me because now suddenly, Mexico has to deal with a unit in the far west, while, Mexico doesn't really have that many armies. And, it has like an army in New Orleans. It has to now send that unit to the west. And Mexico actually tells me, hey, I'm going to round up that unit in Baja and destroy it. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, you don't really need to destroy it, but sure, go ahead. So, the more units you send against that army, the better off I am. So, yeah, that was a boon to me by Peru, actually, at this point. Like, definitely, I had nothing to do with it.
I can certainly understand that impulse by Mexico to destroy it, but might not necessarily help him given the dispersion of his units right now.
Yeah.
And I can see everything you have is moving south, pretty much.
Yeah, so at this point, I don't know if you recall, there was a fleet by New Granada in Gulf of Uraba. Venezuela is asking me, hey, can we destroy that fleet? And so I moved to destroy that fleet. And at this point, that burns me a little bit. I mean, it doesn't really burn me, but it just burns my relationship with New Granada a little bit. New Granada was kind of annoyed at this, the replacement of New Granada. But, because now Mexico can get Panama, but I kind of had to do that also because I had to help Mexico get Panama, right? Like, I have to show Mexico that I remain a loyal ally. Yeah. So that was a move I had to do. And the relationship with New Granada was not really that important. And then other than that, Mexico moves to West Caribbean, the plan being for Mexico to send more units through the Panama Canal. So also a good thing for me. I mean, West Caribbean is a bit of a sensitive territory, but I have plenty of fleets there, so I'm not really worried about it.
Going to the south.
At this point, Argentina actually has been playing very poorly and for a while, and I start giving him tactical advice on how to play this to stop Chile, and Argentina actually starts following my tactical advice. So it manages to slow down Chile a little bit, not too much. Yeah, and Chile made that silly call there to actually build a fleet in Talca instead of an army. which I would have expected him to do to protect Patagonia. But in the end, Chile unexpectedly moves that army to Pampas on the other hand, which does delay Chile, but then Argentina cannot gain Patagonia anymore. That's I think mostly it. Other than that, Venezuela moves to South Salvador, and I move to Mid-Atlantic, and the plan is that Venezuela is going to support me into South Atlantic, as I recall. But that also gives me a direct line to South Salvador, by the way. Yeah. I think the other thing that happens at this point is that Venezuela actually drops. So Venezuela, I think, has a second NMR, and after this move, drops. So we'll get there in a bit.
Okay. So in the fall, we see that Mexico tries to convoy to Alta California, part of his plan to destroy Baja, no doubt.
And also not to get out of position from North Pacific, while also protecting Alta California,
Mexico finally gets Panama, thanks to you earlier having destroyed the unit in Gulf of Uraba.
Right. And then I also got Cartagena for him. So as I mentioned, Venezuela at this point, there is a new Venezuela in the game, and actually if we go to the South American map, we'll see more. So I was so upset actually at this point because Venezuela dropped, right? And I had developed a relationship with Venezuela since the beginning of the game. And Venezuela drops, and now I get a new Venezuela, and I know nothing about that Venezuela. I have no relationship. But I'm like, okay, I have two options. One is I stop New Venezuela, maybe I send an army to Caracas or something like that, or maybe to South Salvador, or I stick to the plan and I tell New Venezuela, okay, this is the picture, we are together, we are like destroying New Granada. And at this point, Venezuela had moved to Loreto the last turn, right? And was really causing trouble to Peru. But I think Peru manages to convince New Venezuela that I'm going to stop Venezuela and go for the solo. So Venezuela actually moves everything back. So I tell Venezuela, hey, I'm going to do all of those things for me. Venezuela promises to actually convoy my unit to Rio. So at this point, we have this deal with Venezuela. Let's just take Argentina out at this point. Let's stop Argentina and improve our position against Chile. And Venezuela doesn't actually help me with that. So I cut Cartagena over there. That allows actually Venezuela to gain Bogota because there was an army there in Bogota of New Granadas. But when I cut Cartagena, that actually, meant that Venezuela could walk into Bogota. So Venezuela, the new Venezuela actually betrays me, right? It doesn't do anything of what I asked him to do. It doesn't convoy my unit. So at this point, I'm pretty upset. But I have followed through, right? And I have shown my goodwill. And then going into the next year, that's actually pretty helpful. And I gained Sao Paulo. I think that's my only gain here.
Yes, you did walk right into Sao Paulo.
Yeah, which made Argentina really mad, but I actually managed to maintain my relationship with Argentina there. I told Argentina, you know what happened? Venezuela told me that he was going to support me into Sao Paulo, so he was going to, attack you with me, and but he didn't actually, so he tricked me. And Argentina kind of ate it, actually, yeah.
So looks like you got an army in Trinidad this time. So now I think the stab must be imminent.
I actually tell Venezuela, you betrayed me. How about this? I will build an army in Trinidad and let's bounce in Cumaná. I will give you another chance. My positioning is good. You don't want to betray me. So I'm going to give you another chance and, move against Peru and you can keep going for a three-way between you, me, and Mexico. Basically, that's the deal.
And we will see how exactly that ends up going.
Yeah. Mexico keeps advancing here towards Baja. I think Peru also, actually I expected Peru to bounce up area, and I was lucky that it didn't, right? I wanted Mexico's army to go as far as possible from me, but Peru actually chooses to bounce Sonora. And then Peru also displaces Mid-Pacific over there together with Chile's help. So, Mexico is under pressure in the west. Again, not a bad thing for me. Yeah, so in the south, I do tell Venezuela, hey, attack Peru and we're gonna be okay. And Venezuela, but at the same time, I don't actually expect quite Venezuela to attack Peru, and I'm not going to trust Venezuela again anyway. So Venezuela is expecting a bounce. I still support myself into Cumaná. I move into Guyana current. I bounce actually Bogota out of Cartagena. And I'm talking again with MC, and I telling Granada, hey, move to Santa Marta, and I'm going to support you into Maracaibo, and I will try to bounce Cartagena. I was actually hoping that, I would walk into Cartagena, but that didn't happen. Mexico, meanwhile, moves into Gulf of Panama, and Argentina and I bounce in Rio de Janeiro on purpose, actually. That was in agreement. But yeah, at this point, Venezuela just moves everything to the south, while I start making a move on him.
Kind of the best thing possible for you.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have the retreat. Mexico retreats to Gulf of Tehuantepec.
Yeah.
And going to the next year, we see
Right.
that Mexico finally gets to destroy that Peruvian unit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mexico destroys the Peruvian unit. So, okay, this is the key and the big stab, I think, against Venezuela, because last time I told, so after, Venezuela followed through, I told him, well, you followed through, but I didn't expect you to follow through. I mean, after you stabbed me the previous year, how could I have expected you to follow through? And I tell him, okay, I'm definitely going to follow through this time. You can trust me, I'm going to, at this point, I'm really serious about the three-way, don't worry about it. And again, Venezuela trusts me another time, the new Venezuela. So now I make a move on New Venezuela, and Venezuela at the same time moves everything away from me. Like, I mean, it moves the unit to Mato Grosso. I could have even walked into Suriname. I couldn't have expected that Venezuela would actually be so trusting. It even moves Caracas to Angostura at this point. I mean, it's crazy how he moved everything away. So
Yeah. If Venezuela had actually defended, the only center you could have possibly gotten was Caracas.
yeah, I think that's right. And even more hilariously, Venezuela also supports Sao Paulo into Rio, so that's kind of like the cherry, on top of the cake. But
yeah, it's a very, very strong season for you. Peru retreats.
Yeah, so
And
I mean,
we have another build phase. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, another build phase, another build an army in Jamaica, presumably to convoy it to Venezuela. At this point, Mexico asked me, hey, I just want you not to make any more moves on Venezuela. Take it easy for a year, chill. And we'll be okay. Otherwise, I'm afraid you're going to solo. And I tell Mexico, hey, no problem. I'm going to take it easy.
And we'll see how easy you take it. And it looks like you're not taking it quite as easy as we might have expected.
Yeah, this is the year of the big stab finally on Mexico. I mean, I was positioned to move on Mexico for a while, but I was really waiting. We have an agreement that Mexico is going to cover Havana. I bounce Havana. I make a bunch of moves there to Missouri, to Tennessee. I move the fleet to the lakes and the army to Montreal. Mexico is kind of expecting this, so he moves to Texas. He doesn't move to Apacheria, which is pretty helpful. Meanwhile, Venezuela, if you go to the south, reads all of my moves wrong. So at this point, Venezuela knows I'm attacking, right? Yeah. But he does when the things are so complicated, I don't always try to guess what other people are going to do. And I didn't play based on a guess on what Venezuela would do. I thought there was almost a zero chance that Venezuela would go for Cumana. And yet he actually went for Cumana. So, I go for Maracaibo. I go for Angostura, expecting a bounce there somewhere. I just moved to Angostura to cut it. And instead I actually walked in because Venezuela moved to Cumana. And then I convoy Trinidad to Suriname. Venezuela gets into Georgetown, but that's not a big deal because they cannot really hold it. Other than that, I ask Argentina to move to Mato Grosso. So Argentina is my Janissary at this point. Argentina does move to Mato Grosso. I tell him, hey, they have been beating you all along. Move to Mato Grosso and, you can actually make a move that matters. You can actually survive to the end of the game and make Chile lose. And Argentina is on board. So he moves to Mato Grosso. Venezuela also supports itself into Sao Paulo. I think I play a good defense there. I support Rio to hold, while Rio supporting Mao to Sao Salvador. And that also allows me to gain Sao Salvador this turn. I mean, to be honest, my position was good anyway, but the game, the play ends up working out there.
Agreed. Yeah. Agreed. This is a beautiful outcome for you. This is a very good season. And Venezuela before didn't know you were attacking, so I could kind of understand he made some mistakes. But this is kind of the worst sequence that he could have achieved, basically.
Yeah, and at this point, I think I have all of the centers I need to win, but I cannot hold Rio de Janeiro unless Argentina cuts Belo, right? Because if I gain Georgetown, I actually have 24 at this point. So, I'm guessing that most likely...
You actually can hold Rio, but the only issue is whether Chile cuts your support from Todos os Santos.
Exactly. I expect Chile to cut Todos at this point. I mean, Chile actually openly tells me, we had a deal with Chile. The deal was that he was not going to get into Bahia. And at this point, he tells me, you are too successful. We cannot, our deal has to go. So I'm like, okay, I expected that. And so I expect Chile to cut Todos. I expect Venezuela that Venezuela will support Sao Paulo to Rio. So I tell Argentina, hey, I expect Venezuela to support Belo Horizonte to Rio is what I meant, right? Because Venezuela has to keep some centers. Otherwise, if Venezuela supports Sao Paulo to Rio, then Venezuela doesn't get to hold Sao Paulo. I actually get to hold Sao Paulo and I still solo. So I offer Argentina to support him into Sao Paulo. Argentina accepts. And then if you move to the next phase.
I see you got New Orleans.
Yeah, New Orleans was guaranteed. And Havana was guaranteed. I considered playing a more risky play it, but I didn't because I expected that it would end at 24, and so I played it as safe as possible because I thought I was going to be able to keep Rio.
Okay.
And that's what happened. To be honest, even if the game had gone for another year, I would have still soloed this because Venezuela would have had to destroy so many units. But yeah, in the end, things ended up working out. And I finished this year, which meant I didn't have to grind through another year, which is always nice. I hate the grind towards the end of the game, to be honest. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I enjoyed watching it, even though I did not like being beaten by you.
Yeah, it was a good game.
So this is the final position of the map. Final thoughts.
Well, final thoughts. To be honest, I didn't expect to end the game, having, I don't know how many centers I have there in South America. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I was hoping to solo this. And to be honest, I kind of knew that I couldn't gain too many centers from Mexico. I did think that I could actually gain from Mexico at least his eastern centers. So I thought, I would gain New Orleans, I would gain Havana, I would gain Yucatan, most likely. And to be honest, I think I even had a good shot at Texas and Veracruz. Basically, everything that was on the coast, I had a good shot at because I had like so many fleets over there, and Mexico just didn't have the units to protect those, all of those territories. I didn't exactly expect to make actually, I don't know, maybe a third or so, or a fourth of my centers in South America. But I mean, that made my life easier. I would say, this was a game that had like a hard early game, both against you and the United States. Then a pretty easy and kind of boring mid game, to be honest, because at some point I had like 15 units hold, I think, or something. And then a pretty exciting end game with pretty unprecedented success in South America compared to what I expected. A few things happened that helped me a lot. The army that Peru convoyed to Baja definitely was a big help. The good relationship I had with Mexico was huge, and also the really good relationship I had with Venezuela. And in the end, I think, the fact that the new Venezuela came in, I said I was not going to attack them, and I did not. And then in return, New Venezuela moved away. Actually, that ended up being hugely helpful. And frankly, Venezuela betraying me at that point and kind of like giving me an excuse to attack them, that was also very helpful because it meant, I could attack Venezuela without Mexico being, triggered by it and saying I'm going for the solo. Basically, yeah, Venezuela gave me a reason to attack Venezuela, and I was glad to take it. So yeah, it was a pretty fun game overall. I enjoyed it.
It's always fun when the people who should be stopping you from taking the solo fail to bring it together in time and coalesce against you effectively. I think it seems like you made all the right plays here, and you brought it all home. Congratulations on your win.
Thank you. It was fun playing with you. Yeah, and a good game overall.
Brief though my part in the game was.
Yeah. And to be honest, they did try to coalesce in the end, right? But I mean, like in this map, there is always the three-way goal. I mean, that's the best possible result that one can achieve without a solo, since a two-way is not possible. And, both Mexico and Venezuela wanted that three-way, right? So I was in the market for a three-way partner, basically. It was going to be Mexico and then either Venezuela or Chile. And I was playing between those two. Obviously, my goal was a solo if possible. But I mean, I think from the time I made the solo run, yeah, they all coalesced, but at that point it was just too late, frankly.
Hoping you enjoyed this. I look forward to your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy these videos, I hope you will show it with a like, and by joining the roughly half of my viewers who are subscribed. And I also support putting your hands together for the thoughtful and generous people whose names now appear on your screen, our wonderful patrons and translators. You too can join the Alligator Army by clicking the link to join my Patreon in the video description to gain access to a world of exclusive Diplomacy podcast episodes and occasional videos and posts that are only accessible through my Patreon, as well as early access to all YouTube content. I'd buy that for $1. Until next time, Florida Man out.